Let them praises give Jehovah. They were made at his command. Them forever he established. His decree shall ever stand. From the earth, oh, praise Jehovah. All ye floods, ye dragons all. Fire and hail and snow and vapor, stormy winds that hear him call. Let them praises give Jehovah, for his name alone is high. And his glory is exalted. And his glory is exalted. And his glory is exalted, far above the earth and sky.
One or two important points that I want us to realize about New Testament miracles as we are defining them here is when the New Testament miracles happened, the way we're talking about New Testament miracles, they were instantaneous and they were complete. There was not drama around it. It wasn't, let's have a show here and get a crowd and let's put on a performance, but it was get up and walk. And he got up and walked. Somebody that had never walked. Or your sins are forgiven, so that is one of the things that were said for a guy that would be able to get up and walk. But people could see that had never seen. People were dead and were alive. And it wasn't like they, maybe I was asleep or whatever. It was dead to alive. And it's instantaneous and complete. And that is different than most of the ancient pagan rituals and today's claimed miracles, in that they want to put on a show. It's often for money, and we talked about the money aspect of it, and it involves drugs, it involves therapy, it involves various types of activities, and not just instantaneous and complete. One other verse in this lesson that take a look at in Matthew chapter 17, verse 19. Matthew 17:19 says, "And the disciples came to Jesus privately and said, 'Why could we not drive it out?'" Well, what had happened? Jesus, mercy on my son. Somebody came and said, "Lord, have mercy on my son, for he's a lunatic and very ill. For he often falls into a fire and often into the water. I brought him to your disciples, and they could not cure him." And Jesus answered and said, "You unbelieving and perverted generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring him here to me." And Jesus rebuked him, and the demon came out of him, and the boy was cured at once. Then the disciples came to Jesus privately and said, "Why could we not drive it out?" That's the one example of the apostles not being able to do a miracle. And Jesus says, because you don't have enough faith. You don't have faith as a mustard seed, or you'd be able to do this. But it was done, and Jesus did it like all the other miracles, instantaneously and complete. Speaking of the word lunatic, there's an example of it that Jerry was talking about. Pagans used power of suggestion. They used other things. That is not the miracles that we see in the New Testament. That was not what was going on in those. Anybody else have anything you want to add to that? The differences. Yes, Jerry, go ahead.
Anybody ever lived in southeast Texas, southern Louisiana, on into New Orleans, where voodoo is very much a fact of life? They'll show you things that make you think they did something, but it's all based on psychological suggestion. And I mean, it can be so powerful, it will kill a person. But they can do it, but it is not real. It is not. Sticking that pin in that dog really doesn't make somebody else hurt unless they believe it does. And just like Sometimes people will go to the doctor and there's nothing really wrong with them, but they're still feeling bad, and you give them a placebo, and they get well. Well, the same placebo has the power of your brain.
The mind is powerful. Yep.
False beliefs like that, they manipulate that and can really take people captive.
All right.
You know, Jim,
Yeah.
there are magicians today. You know, we just came from Francis. We saw a magician perform it. And he did things that looked like were miracles, but we know they were trickery. So I'm sure a lot of the things that happen today are seriously. Maybe some of those right then too, just trickery.
I'm sure a lot of it was trickery, but I'm sure a lot of it too is power suggestion, because sometimes things happen to people that physiological things can happen to people, and I think that a lot of what Jerry was saying too is the mind is extremely powerful, and if you think you feel better in certain ways, you physiologically feel better in certain ways, and someone convincing. I mean, I watched a guy that did the power suggestion stuff, and he made people do things they would never ever do, because how the people get into their brains, I don't know, but I do know the mind is incredibly powerful, to the point that it can do physiological changes. It's still not a miracle, though, from our definition. That being said, as we start this next lesson, I want to say, people use the word miracles. We've used it a lot in this congregation in the last few weeks. We we've seen some amazing, wonderful things. We started off by talking about the words that we use for miracle. Wonders, wonderful things have happened. Signs, I'm not sure what we've been seeing necessarily as a sign, but we have seen some things that we sometimes call miracles. And I'm not telling anybody you can't call something a miracle if you think it's a wonderful thing. That is part of what a miracle is. What I do want to do, though, is differentiate between a New Testament miracle and a wonderful thing that happens. And part of that we'll talk about as we talk about what God does today. Because God still does wonderful things that are things beyond our comprehension, that sometimes we call miracles. It is not a instantaneous changing of natural law that we saw in the New Testament, and we'll take a look at that. Let's start off Ephesians chapter 1:11, and then chapter 3, verse 16 to 20. A couple of passages there in Ephesians 1:11 and 3:16 through 20. And it's just the last two or three words of this verse 11. If someone has that.
Furthermore, because we are united with Christ, we have received an inheritance from God, for He chose us in advance, and He makes everything work out according to His plan.
Yes, according to His plan, or according to His will. That is the way God works. That is in a He makes things happen. We have that inheritance. It talks about predestination there, and we talked a little bit about that when Jerry was just teaching about Ephesians. But it is according to His plan, according to His will, is how things continue to happen. Chapter 3:16 through 20. Does someone have that?
That He will grant you, according to the riches of His glory, to be strengthened with power through the Spirit in the inner man, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts to faith, and that you be being rooted and grounded in love. Be able to comprehend with all the things that is breadth and length of 15.
Yep.
And know the love of Christ which surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled up to all the fullness of God.
One more verse.
Now to him who is able to do far more abundantly beyond all that we ask or think, according to the power that works within us.
Okay. That last verse is kind of the key. Who is able to do far more abundantly beyond that we can ask or think. That's how God still works in today's world. Beyond what we can even imagine. And it doesn't have to be a New Testament miracle for that to happen. We've seen it. We've seen things that happen, that these are the things that we often call miracles today because we can't even imagine it. We can't fathom it. And that's how God continues to work. One of the things that becomes a big problem is when we forget to be thankful for what He does do. Hebrews chapter 1, verse 3, and then Romans 1, 21 and 22. Are a couple of the verses that talk about that lack of gratitude. Hebrews 1:3 says, "And he is the radiance of His glory and the exact representation of His nature, and upholds all things by the word of His power. When He had made purification of sins, He sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high." People forget that He does. That He is godly, and that He upholds the things of the world by His power. He controls what's going on, and they forget that. And then talking more about the gratitude in Romans chapter 1, 21 and 22. Somebody have that?
Although they knew God, they neither glorified Him as God nor gave thanks to Him. But their thinking became futile, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Although they claimed to be wise, they became...
All right. I'm talking about these people who are a bad people. And they claim to know God, but they didn't honor Him, they didn't give thanks to Him, and they thought they were wise, but they became foolish. That is one of the fastest ways that we can get ourselves into trouble. That leads to idolatry and immorality when we think that we don't need God for all the good things that happen. Luke chapter 12:19. Luke 12:19. Yep. We think we have enough, and that is one of the things that I think will lead us away from God when we don't think that we need Him, and I think that's part of why Christianity has declined, because, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the orderliness of God. And we think that we don't need God because I work hard and I get rich. Well, that is because of the orderliness of God. That is not because you worked hard that you get rich. It's because God set things up in order, in a pattern where things are predictable. And so we think, A leads to B, well, really, God leads to B. Does that make sense? Am I making sense with what I'm saying there? That we think that we're the cause of things because of however we work and think and do things, but the real cause is God. Yes.
Right now, I'm reading through the Minor Prophets. Boy, there's hailstones, bad stuff and destruction, whatever. I firmly believe in the history of our country that God intended for the United States to occur. I mean, you just cannot see any other way than such a meager force was able to withstand England. And you know, just because he benefited us doesn't mean that we're not going to be punished as a nation. I mean, we're doing some things right now. Just
I'm with you there.
I wrote my congressman and told him what I thought about certain things. And I think democracy is a good thing, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we're righteous. I'm telling you.
I'm 100% on board with you there. That being said, we talk about God is in control. We see Scripture that talks about God being in control. In Romans, it talks about Jesus talking to Pilate said, "You wouldn't have any control over me unless God gave you that control." It talks about governments being. Our governments are not there without the blessing and God putting them there. That being said, we start thinking we know how God works because He is predictable. He made a universe with orderliness. In other words, if we plant an acorn, we're not going to get a rose bush. It will always do what it's supposed to do. That's the way. That's the way it is. I wish I came up with examples off the top of my head, but there are example after example after example of things working. You know, the earth rotates around the sun. Sometimes it's closer, sometimes it's farther. In the seasons, every year you're going to have summer, spring, winter, fall, and it's that way. And we can plan hundreds of years in advance for certain things. The eclipse that we had, we knew way far ahead of time that that's going to happen because of the orderliness of God's creation. So we think, okay, we've got it down. Now we know, and so we start thinking that we have the answers. Along with that, we think that we know kind of how God works. And sometimes God works in mysterious ways. The next thing I put on there, a lot of times we as people and people in general think we give God credit for the positive things. God's good. And I probably all of y'all have heard, I've heard several times, I don't think God would do that. God, you know, how could God make XYZ happen? That's a bad thing. And sometimes bad things happen to good people and so on and so forth. And so they say, well, how can I believe in God? A good God would not allow that bad thing to happen. And we believe that they believe that the ugly, bad, and evil are evidence that God does not act in the affairs of men. Sometimes they think it's like that. What was it? Paradise Lost, where world's kind of wound up and let go, and God doesn't have anything to do with the ongoing affairs of men. There's a lot of people that say, yeah, I believe God created the world, but He doesn't have anything to do with us now. He set it up and it's going, and what happens, happens, and that He has little or no effect in what's going on today. Have y'all heard or known people that kind of believe that?
Well, you know, in World War II, the Jews were almost totally wiped out from the world. But had there not have been the Holocaust, I do not think that Israel would be in existence today.
As a nation.
as a nation.
That,
So, I mean, that was a horrendous thing to happen. But there was some good that came out of it, I think. You know, you were the Holocaust started, or World War started, who started that? That's where McDonald's came out, the Great Depression. Years before the Great Depression, McDonald's.
If we stand back and look, in fact, Romans talks about man has no excuse because of what he sees in nature. Colossians 1:15-17 says, He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by Him all things were created, both in the heavens and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things have been created through Him and for Him. He is before all things, and in Him all things hold together. This world is still held together because of God and from what Jesus had done. The one thing that, because it is so consistent and orderly, we start making presumptions of this is how God is. And the one of the lessons that I think I've learned as I go through here is don't be presumptuous. If Scripture doesn't tell us, we can't presume things. And that kind of goes against what I just said, in that things are very orderly instruction, orderly. So I say, okay, we can always presume that an acorn is going to make an oak tree or whatever, but when we start thinking about how God acts and what He's going to do and what He is doing for us, we need to be careful about being presumptuous. Yes.
You were talking a second ago about, God winding it up and just letting it. I think in a lot of ways that is true, because this is Satan's world, and the wicked, they just toss to and fro and doing what they want and when they want, and sin and evil and wickedness, and God just kind of gives them over to their own devices. It talks about in Romans where God gave them up to
that's
just okay,
what we just read.
You don't want me a part of it, then just do your thing. But as far as we go, I believe that God has a hedge of protection around us to an extent, and guides our steps. And
I think it would be very interesting to do a study, and in my mind at least, the binding of Satan. He'll be bound and then he'll be loosed for a time and then thrown into the abyss and so forth. How does that, if at all, fit with what we're talking about here as far as what is Satan's power? And again, I'm not going to go there today, but it is a very interesting study as to what is Satan's power, what can he do, and so forth.
He has the power to give Jesus all the power and nations of the world if he would bow down and worship him.
Yeah.
That was my point.
Time's up. We will complete that lesson, and then after that, just a few small little details. But
Blessed be your name, the land that is plentiful, where streams of abundance flow. Blessed be your name. Blessed be your name, when found in the desert place, or walk through the wilderness. Blessed be your name. still have joy. I still have joy. After all the things we've been through, I still have joy. I still have joy. I still have joy. After all the things we've been through, I still have joy. I still have peace. I still have peace.